One of the biggest problems that music producers face in today's industry is the debate over whether to self-release or to release on a label. Now, there's benefits between both, but you have to also understand the utility behind either option here. Let's talk about just releasing on a standard label. Now, there's plenty of choice out there, but the problem being is that because there's so much oversaturation in our industry now, that it means that labels have too much choice. And as I've said in previous videos, because of this endless amount of choice, the standards are way higher now. So obviously the quality is much higher than what it was than before. And not only that, but most labels are actually backed up from a year out from now. And obviously I'm just talking about the more desired labels, not the more low tier to mid tier ones. Because the low tier, mid tier ones are easy to get on because they, not many people want to be on there in the first place because they don't have a lot of utility. They don't provide a lot of value for the people that release on the label. So they're not desired as much. The more high tier label that I'm talking about is more so a label that is like a family orientated thing. Like it's got its own vibe where if you release on there, you're going to be indexed into all the Spotify playlists. You're going to have a chance of playing their events that they throw around the world. There's going to be a bunch of different in-house collaborations that can happen off of your first release, and also multiple deals that you can just keep releasing through that same label and continue to build a big brand that way. Now, obviously these kind of labels are the end game goal for everybody. Once you get onto a label like this, you're pretty much set in stone. Now, when I'm talking about high tier labels such as this, I'm referring to ones like Spinnin', Disciple, Deadbeats, Monster Cat. Once you sign to one of these labels, you're pretty much set for the rest of your career. Now, in terms of how to get onto these labels, you have to obviously work your way up. You need to create leverage in the industry. You need to start building the brand out, the content strategy, the community, building hype around yourself as well. So then these label owners, these A&Rs can be like, okay, we can actually bring on somebody else and give them a chance. Because at the moment, these high tier labels, they've already got a huge roster of artists that they can go through to continue their releases. They've got so much music to go off of just off of those ones that are already signed there, that they don't need to bring on new talent unless there's an exception. Like if you're doing exceptionally well, you've got lots of hype around you and your socials are going crazy. Let's say on short form content, you're getting like million play videos. Of course, they're gonna reach out to you, or if you submit to them, they're gonna consider bringing you on because of all these stats that you bring to the table. Because if you're able to show proof and leverage like this, then these labels have no risk factor. They can see that if they have you on board and release them, that there's going to be 100% chance that your songs are going to do well because you've already got the stats to prove it based off of just your organic growth on short form platforms. And this is why I push this so religiously now. Like if you're able to grow a brand from TikToks, Reels, Shorts on YouTube and leverage that, you're going to have so much autonomy to be doing whatever you want to in terms of labels. And this goes over to my next thing, that if you want to get onto a mid-tier to high-tier label, what you want to look for are a couple of things, right? You want to look for the utility. And when I say that, I mean, is there Spotify playlists that are associated heavily with this label? Is there events that happen through this label? Like, do they have a bunch of bookings throughout the world that you could possibly jump on at some point? Does the label provide you any kind of leverage? Like, is there enough hype behind the label that after releasing with it, would it provide an opportunity to then release on another label of the same kind of caliber or maybe even more? So you always want to think about, what can this label provide me? Maybe they have like a really good email list. So when you release on there, when they submit your tracks to their promo list, there's a high chance that you're going to get more artist support this way because they have like a really good history of getting artist support through their releases. And you can find this out by going to websites like Tracklist 1001 and doing the research yourself, seeing what tracks got indexed into the most kind of playlists, into so not playlists, in terms of the most kind of mixes. So when an artist is playing out live, oftentimes somebody will index that on Tracklist 1001. You can see what tracks are appearing the most in whatever scenario. And that can give you the data points to really figure out if a label has that kind of leverage. And you can apply the same thing to Spotify. You can have a look at what playlists are putting specific songs in with that label. So once you go through that checklist, figuring out what can this label actually provide, go through the checklist and figure out, is this providing me leverage? If not, then why would I release with them? What is the label really providing you besides the opportunity to say, I've been on this label, I've released on this label. Because at the end of the day, that's just a short-term fix. That's not going to push your career forward like a lot of other options out there. So releasing on somebody else's label isn't always the best option. Sometimes it's better off just self-releasing depending on the scenario. Now, I would highly recommend holding out in terms of releasing until your quality is up where it needs to be, and as well as your quantity, so you can continuously release music. But if you're holding out for a specific label, make sure that your quality is where it needs to be before even worrying about labels in the first place. And this also applies to self-releasing. Now, the difference between this is obviously you're releasing yourself. You're not releasing on somebody else's label. Now, there's some pros and cons to this as well. If you're releasing yourself without an external factor, there's always going to be that risk of, oh, I don't know how well this track's going to do, because you're not relying on a label that has proof and a track history of always doing well, right? Because maybe you've never self-released. So it can be quite disheartening when you're doing it for the first time. You don't know what the result's going to be. You don't know how to go about it and whatnot. But the benefits is really that you have the full autonomy to push the track as far as you want to in terms of marketing. Like, there's plenty of different ways of doing it. For example, you can be running ads on things. You can be just creating a really good content strategy. I would highly recommend leaning more towards the content strategy more than anything. Because of short form content nowadays, you can literally be posting multiple times per day on TikTok, Reels, YouTube Shorts, in all sorts of different varieties until you actually get enough momentum on the release. But again, I'd highly encourage you to hold off even releasing period until you've got the quality where it needs to be, because people tend to have first-hand impressions. So if you already have an existing audience, or maybe you're trying to build an audience from that first release or first couple of self-releases, whatever, if the quality isn't where it needs to be, these people will listen to it and very much so overlook it, because there's already so much other music being released consistently that are already at a high standard. So if they hear your music and it's not where it needs to be, they're gonna completely overlook it and move on to the next thing. So you might end up wasting, you know, a lot of money and time trying to do this yourself. So if you are self-releasing, just make sure the quality is where it needs to be, and then make sure you're doing a high volume of a really good content strategy. However, if you're holding out for a mid-tier to high-tier label, also make sure the quality is where it needs to be, but start building leverage however you can, so then there's a higher chance of them actually taking you on when the opportunity arises. The good thing about self-releasing though is that you can use that to create leverage to then get onto a mid-tier to high-tier label. So for example, let's say you were putting out a bunch of short form content, a content strategy that ended up doing really well. You got 300 to 500K players on a video, and then that translated across to like 100K listeners on Spotify for that specific track. Now that is leverage right there, because you can say, this is how well the track did on its own. Imagine what happens if you actually were with a label that actually helped out with that. Now, this is actually an example from one of my students, Neotech, who self-promoted the shit out of his own release. It was a remix. Well, originally it was just the Sweater Weather remix of, Sweater Weather that was on TikTok that was viral at the time. He did his own version, then that ended up turning into an original, got released, and then he translated a ton of, he had like 300K plays on a video, and that just translated all across to his Spotify, where he had like 100K listeners on that track. And actually looking at his Spotify right now, he's already got 1 million on that same track, and it's only been a couple of months. That being said, guys, I hope you got a lot of value out of this video. If you need help with figuring out leverage, trying to self-release and figure out the next best steps to do that, so then you don't have any uncertainty if you're going in the right direction or not, then you click that link in our bio, in our description, and that's going to take you over to our website where you can book in a discovery session. And from there, you can see if you're a good fit for Industry Set or not, see if we can help you or not. We might not be able to, but the only way to find out is to have a conversation about it. That being said, I'll see you in the next video.